everyone, we are going to talk about one of the themes in our novel Great Expectations. Let's begin. Great Expectations shows the development of a single character like Philip, better known to himself and to the world as Pip. In this novel, we see Pip narrating the story, the people around him, and how they changed and grew. Love marriage is one of the important themes of this novel. Love marriage is a recurring theme in Great Expectations. Throughout the novel, we see several characters fall in love and get married, but the effect of love and marriage was different for each of them. Let's talk about Miss Havisham and Mr. Compassion. Miss Havisham believed in fairy tale love stories, where the man and woman live happily ever after, but the real world was very different. Despite being warned by her cousin, she falls in love with an evil man named the Compassion, who was after her fortune. She was jilted on her wedding day. This shock changed her view towards life and the world. She lost her faith on men. She had no love or positive feeling towards men. In order to exact her revenge on men, she adopts Estelle. She advises Estella, break their heart, my bride, break their heart, and I have no mercy. Her madness for revenge not only destroyed her life, but also Estella's and Pip's. If she didn't raise Estella as cold, then Pip and Estella could fall in love with each other and get married and lived happily ever after. She eventually understood her mistake and asked Pip for forgiveness and committed suicide like Pip. Love and marriage caused major heart attack for.
First, let us look at love and marriage in Pip's life. He fell in love with Estella, but Estella never respected him. Estella may be beautiful, but she was very cold. She froze the hearts of everyone around her. It was Estella who sowed the seeds of ambition in Pip's heart. The only reason behind Pip's desire to become a gentleman was to get Estella's hand. Pip didn't like the place where he lived. He felt embarrassed about Joe and his poverty. To gain higher social status, he ignored and distanced himself from the people who mattered most in his life. This meaningless love didn't bring any happiness in Pip's life but made it more miserable. Let's talk about Stella and Drummel. Her married life was very unhappy, as Drummel often beat her. Eventually, her unhappy married life taught her a great lesson, and she became a great person. In the end, we see Stella, like Pip, becomes a changed person. She treats Pip with respect. We concluded that love and marriage didn't bring any happiness in lives of Pip, Miss Havisham, and Estella. Joe and Biddy is an exception in this case. Joe is a very simple man. He was a blacksmith and led a simple life. Unlike Pip, Joe had no ambition. Biddy was an orphan just like Pip, but she was very simple and had more common sense than Pip. She was not so beautiful like Estella, but what makes us love her was simplicity and love. Biddy liked Pip, but she also knew that Pip was madly in love with Estella. She warned Pip about the consequences of such love. After Mrs. Gregory's accident, Biddy moves to Joe's house to take care of ailing Mrs. Gregory. She worked very hard and took a great care. Eventually, Joe and Biddy got married and led a happy life.
Thank you for listening to me. This was presented by Ines Ibrahim. Goodbye.
Today we will talking about children forced to accept the reality of circumstance and loss of innocence in story Great Expectation for Charles Dickens. Losing parents is always traumatic. It may be resulting in first, increased child abuse, child depression, high risk of criminal behavior. Finally, low rates at school. Stella and Pip are the clear examples of losing innocence in Great Expectations. Both were forced to accept the reality of their circumstances and losing their innocence. Both lost their parents but in different ways. Let's start with Pip. Pip. He was a little boy who lost his parents. He abused by his sister. He was brought up with many slaps and spankings from his sister, Mrs. Joe Gregory. She never left him in peace. She abused him physically and mentally, and her mistreatment affected him emotionally, causing him to become fearful and insecure. Second, Stella. Stella's mother made a deal with Mr. Jaggers when he got her from the prison. He gave Stella to Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham abused Stella psychologically rather than physically. She is brought up to despise men, but to use her beauty to attract them and then break their hearts. Finally, neither Pep nor Stella is ever innocent, because their childhood are abusive in different ways. Thanks.
In the name of Allah, the most merciful and most compassionate, first of all, I'd like to express my thanks and gratitude to Mrs. Shaimat Fuad for the extraordinary efforts she's doing with us and in the high standards at which she's teaching us English. Great Expectations is a masterpiece by Charles Dickens as regards everything the plot, the themes, the symbols, etc. etc. I'll shed light on the themes because they represent the take home messages and the main ideas that the author wants us to remember. I'm Mona Mahmoud, a second prep school student at AL-WAHA Language School. Charles Dickens was born in the south of England in 1812 in Portsmouth. He had a poor and difficult childhood. His father was arrested when he was 12, which led him to work in a factory for small pay. In 1833, he started writing stories and became famous and rich. He died in 1870 because of a stroke at the age of 58. Famous novels by Charles Dickens, including Great Expectations, which was written in 1861. The novel's full title is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. It is a novel. It was written in London in 1861. Its narrator is Pip. Its protagonist is Pip. It doesn't contain a specific antagonist. Various characters serve as figures against whom Pip must struggle at various times, like Mrs. Joe, Miss Havisham, and Stella. Themes: the fundamental and often universal ideas explored in a literary work. Ambition and self-improvement are the most important themes according to what the name of the novel implies. Ambition and self-improvement take three forms in Great Expectations: moral, social, educational. First, Pip desires moral self-improvement. He is cruel to himself and feels powerful guilt when he behaves immorally. When he was leaving for London, he blamed himself for being hard and not saying goodbye properly to Joe and Biddy. Second, Pip desires social self-improvement in love with Stella and becoming a member of her social class. Third, Pip desires educational improvement. This desire is deeply connected to his social ambition and longing to marry Stella. Full education is a requirement of being a gentleman. Pip learns that social and educational improvement are irrelevant to one's real worth and that conscience and affection are to be valued above education and social standing. Social class. Throughout Great Expectations, Dickens explores the class system of Victorian England, ranging from the most wretched criminals like Magwitch and Compeyson to the poor peasants of the marsh country like Joe and Biddy, to the middle class like Pumblechook, to the very rich like Miss Havisham. Crime, guilt, and innocence. The theme of crime, guilt, and innocence is explored throughout the novel largely through the characters of the convicts and the criminal lawyer Jaggers. From the handcuffs Joe mends at the smithy to the gallows at the prison in London, the imagery of crime and criminal justice pervades the book, becoming an important symbol of Pip's inner struggle to reconcile his own inner moral conscience with the state's justice system. Sophistication. In Great Expectations, he becomes obsessed with the desire to be sophisticated and takes risks to do so. After moving to London, he quickly began to contract expensive habits like personal servant and fancy clothes and spent a lot of money on this. Pip tried to avoid anyone who might undermine his reputation as a sophisticated young gentleman. In the end, sophistication is revealed as a shallow and superficial value because it doesn't lead to Pip achieving anything and only makes him lonely and miserable. Love and friendship. Pip has three major loves in his life: Stella, Joe, and Herbert. He treats Joe badly and longs for Stella and shows compassion to Herbert. His whole desire to become a gentleman was out of love for Stella. Here is our famous triad: Pip, Miss Havisham, and Stella. Finally, the main idea of Great Expectations. Is Pip a success or a failure? In terms of his initial hopes and expectations, Pip seems to end the novel as a failure. His two great hopes have been to rise to the status of a gentleman and win Stella's heart, and doesn't achieve either of these goals. On the other hand, Pip succeeds at developing a sense of empathy. He becomes able to appreciate and respect people based on their characters rather than on shallow indications of class and status. He is the novel a failure according to the standards he initially holds, but a success because he has learned what better and truer standards of a good life actually are. Thanks for listening.